He is called one of the most prominent and most controversial politicians of the 20th century, the last Secretary-General of the CPSU Central Committee, the first and the last President of the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev, left behind a rich legacy which is being disputed more than 30 years later. His attempt to create socialism with a human face failed, but he can truly be considered the father of Russian democracy and an innovator who by all means tried to change the inveterate order. Gorbachev noticeably stood out from the entire galaxy of the Kremlin elders. Konstantin Chernenko was already seriously ill and played a rather intermediate role in the management of the Soviet Union. Konstantin Ustinovich was 72 years old when he took office. Gorbachev, on the other hand, young, educated, ambitious, and not afraid of change, seemed to be an excellent candidate for the post of the head of state. On March 11, 1985, the day after Chernenko's death, Mikhail Gorbachev was elected Secretary-General at an extraordinary plenary of the CPSU Central Committee. He was 54 years old, which made him one of the youngest leaders of the USSR. During his rule, Mikhail Gorbachev gained a reputation as a global reformer. Being at the helm, he immediately began to implement a large-scale plan for the democratization of society, now known as Perestroika. The main points of his program were the acceleration of economic growth and the improvement of social conditions in the USSR in a short time. The newly made leader actively traveled around the country. He spoke at plants and factories, constantly surprising people with energetic and open manner of communication. Accelerate progress of the whole country, improve well-being, quality of goods, technology, housing construction, discipline and order. That's what's necessary. Be closer to the people, we will never let you down. How can you come closer? Gorbachev's words inspired optimism and hope for a long-awaited way out of the stalemate, and in many ways, these aspirations were rewarded by the proclamation of a policy of openness. This meant actually abandoning party censorship in the media and art. The newspapers, with unusual for Soviet ideology names, appeared: Independent Newspaper, Kommersant. The spirit of freedom was also felt by television, debates on the air, teleconferences and live broadcasts, discussion of the most sensitive topics in the studios of such programs as View, 12th Floor, Spotlight, Perestroika. It was under Gorbachev that persecution for the dissent ceased in the Soviet Union. A vivid example of this was the return from political exile of the Soviet scientist and dissident academician Andrei Sakharov. During these difficult years, the people became different. They inhaled the air of freedom, and no one can take it from them. He has brought Russia closer to democracy than ever before in its centuries-old history, and together with the partners he found among American presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, closer than anyone before him, he came to the end of the long-lasting Cold War. Let's talk about hotspots and regional problems. Today, it is the main thing. He and his wife, Raisa, often traveled abroad, to France, Belgium, Great Britain, USA. From 1985 to 1988, Gorbachev held 4 bilateral meetings with US President Ronald Reagan, which marked a significant warming of relations between the USSR and the West. Better safe than sorry. You repeat it at every meeting. Gorbachev manages to win the trust of the President of the United States. They sign a bilateral intermediate-range nuclear forces treaty. The treaty that all people await, the people of the whole world. The Soviet leader withdraws troops from Afghanistan without demanding anything from the West in return. The British Time magazine calls him Man of the Year and then Man of the Decade. In 1990, the Soviet leader was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Gorbachev continues to fascinate the West. Since the late 70s, the leadership of West Germany asked the Soviet Union to withdraw troops from the East Germany and offered hundreds of millions of marks for this. The Soviet Union announces an emergency withdrawal of troops, and again without conditions. The Berlin Wall falls. During the years of his rule, Gorbachev put forward a number of peace initiatives and proclaimed a policy of new thinking in international affairs. The USSR government unilaterally declared a moratorium on nuclear testing. Protocol to the Treaty of Nuclear Weapon Test Limitations. However, the most expectations on a promising politician were placed at home in the Union, and the center of general attention were Mikhail's innovations in the field of economics. In 1986, a campaign against non-labor income began, which on the ground was understood as a fight against summer residents and sale of surplus of their crops, sellers of flowers, and those who are now called gypsy cabs. However, the program soon was cancelled and a diametrically opposite idea came in its place, the beginnings of the first elements of market economy. Enterprises are transferred to self-accounting, self-reliance and self-financing. A law on cooperation is being introduced in order to increase competition and the well-being of citizens. Superiors at plants and factories are not appointed but chosen. However, some types of goods and services by that time were under strict government control. A year before the opening of cooperatives, a decree on strengthening the fight against excessive drinking and alcoholism was issued. As a result, alcohol prices increased by 45%. A huge number of alcohol production plants closed, and sugar disappeared from store shelves, as people were engaged in underground moonshine brewing. Severe measures led to a significant economic recession. In the fight for sobriety, the country lost 62 billion rubles. After the economic downturn, Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms began to be perceived as an unsuccessful experiment on his citizens. The sharp drop in oil prices becomes the final straw to the Soviet financial system. The country's gold reserve has shrunk 11 times, and external debt has grown 5 times. Store shelves are empty, groceries and various goods in stores are distributed on coupons. It is almost impossible to get some of them due to deficit. Finally, credibility of the state is undermined by the monetary reform of 1991. The government withdraws large bills from circulation and limits the withdrawal of cash from bank deposits, and then raises the prices several times. The population perceived this as a confiscation of savings. By the 1990s, reproaches for the government are heard everywhere. There are calls to abandon the Soviet system and socialist values. After not receiving the promised changes for the better, the citizens decided they are not on the same page with the party's policy. Nationalists are gaining strength in the republics, who demand their secession from the USSR. During the August coup and the attempt to remove Gorbachev from the post of president, undertaken by the State Committee on the State of Emergency, the members of the State of Emergency Committee aimed at preserving the USSR, but without the widespread support of the population, they acted indecisively and only accelerated the collapse of the Union. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev announces his resignation. The democratic reform he tried to carry out in the Soviet Union ended with the country breakup. All these changes required enormous tension. They took place in an acute struggle of increasing resistance of the forces of the old, annealed, reactionary, and previous structures in economy legislation, and our habits, ideological prejudices, equalized dependent psychology. They ran into our intolerance, low level of political culture, fear of change. On December the 24th, 1991, Gorbachev's last interview as president of the USSR appeared in press. He said, "The main task of my life became a reality." I am still optimistic.